Yo, what's up, everybody? Welcome. We are back. It's been a little while, but we are back. We've done many. We've talked about True Detective a lot, and we did Night Country analysis. I don't think Night Country deserves to bear the name of True Detective, but I linked those on in the description. The first one, Arctic Syzygy, we did on Baselit Analyzer's channel, and then Star Shaped Wounds. Well, we covered what was supposed to be the second half, ended up being the last two episodes because they only did six episodes, and you can hear us. You can hear all our ranting and raving about that season. So you can check that one out in the description link. But yeah, in various streams, season season one has come up a lot, and obviously there's going to be spoilers. But this season it's 11 years old this year, so if you haven't seen it by now, I don't know what to tell you. And just as a quick note before we get into it, this season does deal with some really dark and disturbing and evil subject matter. Obviously, we're going to be delicate about that. I'm not really too worried about the algorithm or anything. But still, we're not going to be gratuitous or gross or anything like that. But, just to give people a heads up on that, it certainly can be upsetting subject matter. But it's still, as I think I said this in the description, this is I think the greatest thing ever put on television. True Detective season one it's incredible, and it's something that I kept picking up new things every time each time I watch it. I think it was about the fifth or sixth time I watched it in preparation for this. So um, yeah, it's the kind of the series, the season that keeps on giving. So anyway, yeah, we're gonna go ahead and jump into it. Like I said in the Instagram post, this could be the first of many. We don't really know how this is going to go. We might be able to tackle the whole season in one stream. I have a feeling we won't. So this may be the start of a series, and who knows? We're just kind of taking it as it comes, and seeing where we go with it. So I wanted to ask because BLA, when this season first came out, everybody was talking about it. By the time I watched it, it was 2014. The whole season was out on HBO. It's called HBO Go at the time, and I got access to HBO Go, and I watched the entire season in two sittings because this was the talk of everything back in 2014, and was just blown away. And I didn't really fully understand the season, in the sense that I didn't fully understand everything that went into it, and the series as the season, kind of how it ties in with real life events, and there's allusions to real types of things. So I'm curious as to what was your first exposure to True Detective season one, and did you watch it initially when it came out, or what was your initial interaction with it?
I can see your soul at the corner of your eyes. It's corrosive, like acid in your mouth. Don't bring him round here no more, shorty. Yeah, man. Yo, what's up, y'all? Yeah, I watched. Man, listen, you watched it in two settings. I watched it in one because when I watch something, I go all the way, hardcore. It's like somebody's remnant of a dream of a town. They got this throwing gumbo down there on the tracks. Stop Cajun hate. So look, yeah, I watched this all the way in one go. I watched everything in one. In fact, this time around, I watched it in one go. This time around, I watched them all in one go. The second and the third series, uh, seasons, I watched as they came out because it was on HBO or whatever, and I watched them. Just kind of like I watched Lost back in the day, which was week by week. That's how television, when there was television. That's how it used to be, and you had the real cliffhanger and stuff. But and I watched this and Breaking Bad around this. It was the same winter, and I'd put off Breaking Bad. I didn't watch Breaking Bad when it was out, and then I watched it in 2014, the whole thing. And yeah, I watched it in one go. And same with this one. I mean, really, this is 8 episodes, so you can get home from work and watch the whole thing in one sitting. If you're schizophrenic, like no, and this is for real. This is I think this is probably the greatest show in television. It certainly was responsible for the revival of television. This is like in the 2010s, in the teens or whatever. This is what happened with streaming, and this was like there were a bunch of good shows that came out, and this is one of them. And what's really great about this show is that it walks the line pretty adeptly between, it could go wrong very easily. It could have been a really bad show, but it did that. It's such a great show because it really went all the way. And a lot of people I know probably compare it to a kind of Twin Peaks on television. Like, how could this be on television? There still hasn't really been anything like this on television. I mean, this show is really so hardcore, and it really did go all the way with stuff. And it's so well done. It's also amazing because it shows the crossover that Matthew McConaughey had from movies into television. It showed that television became a serious medium, and this really kickstarted movie stars going into long form television series. And that was because the writing was so strong from Nick Pizzolatto. And I read his Galveston book after this, after this came out. And then Joji Fukunaga, the director, is so strong. He ended up in doing Spectre. I think he did Spectre. He did a Bond movie. I think it was Spectre. It might have been Spectre. I think it was Spectre. It might have been Spectre. I've been watching a lot of Tim Dillon, so I'm getting into my Tim Dillon cadence. I work at Panera Bread. You want that heated up?
It was Sam Mendes that did Spectre, but let me look up and I'll find out which one it was.
I mean, it wasn't Skyfall. It was one of them. Maybe it was the final. Maybe it was the final one.
He did No Time to Die.
There you go. It was the very last one. Carried Joji Fukunaga, and maybe they'll reboot it and they'll do something cool. I thought that the second and the third seasons were good, and especially I thought both of them were good. Second season deals with Esalen and Bohemian Grove. Third season deals with the West Memphis and the so-called satanic panic, and of course LERPs. It's got Mahershala Ali. He's I'm a LERP and I'm lost.
I'm gonna stare at the camera down a hallway for a minute.
Yeah, I'm wandering around in my bathrobe. Where am I? Yeah, that one. But this one is so dope, dude. It's such a good series. And rewatching it 11 years later, it's crazy. I think everybody should do that. And you really catch a lot of stuff and notice what you meant, because this also, the internet wasn't what it is now, in 2014. And just a lot of things were very different. And it's just amazing. I think that this show really did seep into people's consciousness in a way they probably don't even realize. So it's interesting going back to watch it.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. But really good points there. And yeah, I mean, this show was interesting because I remember a million think pieces being written about it, and this really was the show. I mean, you can look at a show like The Sopranos, where James Gandolfini had done some film work, but he really made the name for himself on The Sopranos, right? You can look at, like Timothy Olyphant had done some movies, but he really made a name for himself on Justified, right? But then this is where you had, Matthew McConaughey, Woody Harrelson, you had later on, like you said, Mahershala Ali, you had Rachel McAdams, Colin Farrell, Vince Vaughn, like big name people who like leading actors in movies, who then, and even Jodie Foster, with Night Country, who then made the switch over to TV. But it was way more daring, I think, for for McConaughey and Harrelson to make that leap, because it was sort of unproven. Because I can't really, I mean, maybe there's another example, but I can't really think of any A-list actors who had made that switch of going over to television prior to. I mean, I'm sure there's some example, but they were kind of the ones that pioneered that, and then yeah, it became like the thing to do, like to try to get into TVs, and to get into to get on TV rather. And you can kind of see where, I mean, Hollywood is sort of, I don't want to say it's dead now, but it's maybe on life support. But I mean, they were really way ahead of the curve, before
They
now,
were.
where you have like everybody, like I just saw, well, like Channing Tatum is now doing a show for like Apple or something. So
Yeah.
it's interesting to kind of see now that's where everybody's trying to go. And
Yeah.
even that reminds me of that great. I'm not a Ricky Gervais fan, but that Golden Globes monologue he did. He had the joke about, everybody, like, oh, everybody's going
He's your
to.
friend.
Yeah,
He's
he's
your
like,
friend. Yeah.
he said that everybody goes to TV now, and he was like, oh, if ISIS started the streaming service, you'd call your agent. It's like, nobody goes to movies anymore. It's about TV, and I think now that's
Well,
really been proven.
yeah. Blink Twice. Yeah, I did an analysis of Blink Twice. It's over on the members. Hey, shouts out to the members on my channel. Shameless self plug. Movie stars used to come from television. The best example of that is probably Bruce Willis. I saw a
Mm.
thing the other day that said that Bruce Willis actually started as the gopher at Saturday Night Live.
Really?
And then, yeah, and he was the guy who refilled the M&M's bowls and all that stuff
Huh.
in the green room. And Bill Murray knew him, and then he went on to Moonlighting. Moonlighting was a very famous show. Pierce Brosnan also did that. Pierce Brosnan was in Remington Steele and then had a contract for Bond and was supposed to go into it, but he did Scarecrow and Mrs. King, and he already had a contract that he signed, so he couldn't go into Bond. And then so they got Timothy Dalton for another one, which is good. I'm glad they did that because I like
Yeah.
his films are totally different. But then he went into Bond later on, and now he's back in television with this Mobland show, which I watched the first 2 episodes of, and it was it's kind of tedious and slow. So one thing that first of all, I'll say there's probably going to be something like this with podcasting, and I will find out for you. Another shameless self plug. I'm doing an interview in 2 weeks with an old friend of mine who is an insider in the film and television industry and has just written and produced a successful podcast called Tom Slick about a sort of industrialist CIA Bigfoot hunter, and he's played by Owen Wilson in the podcast. Owen Wilson and Sissy Spacek are in it, and I'll be interviewing her to see what she says about this. But this is gonna be a thing. Podcasting has already made its way into long form television, and it's eventually gonna make its way into film in a way where we're gonna see this kind of. It won't be a renaissance; it'll be a birth of something that makes its way into film. And of course, the Karanka era changed a lot of the rules of filmmaking. But one of the things that True Detective did that has been ruined over the years is that it kept the script and it kept the series extremely tight. It was tight. The pacing was tight. It has this show has a slow, deliberate pace, and it breathes, but it changed over time until it got to a point where now, long series are pretty much insufferable. Most of it is taken
Yeah.
up with space trying to fill up 8 or 10 episodes. And what was great about this show, the first season especially, is that it's only 8 episodes and they are extremely tight. And the non-linear format really lends itself to that. So
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that a lot of the long series. I mean, this is a thing that TV often falls into this, where you get a show and it becomes successful, and so they want to keep it rolling, and so it just
Mhm.
keeps going, and then it just goes off a cliff, and it gets terrible, and that's why I think a show like Justified, a show like Longmire, a show like Sons of Anarchy, which Sons of Anarchy kind of went downhill season 6, but it's like they have a story in a certain number of seasons, they tell it, and I think with this it's even more precise, because it's an anthology series, because it's not like, oh, we have to go through. We don't have like 7 seasons we have to tell, and I think the pacing on this one worked really well, and I had another point I was going to make about that, about the show and the pacing and oh, I was gonna, you know what this show kind of reminded me of in this time around watching it, and it reminded me of From Dusk Till Dawn, the movie, not the
Mm-hmm.
show,
Uh-huh.
because, and I remember there was a great documentary. I think it's kind of hard to find these days. It was called Full Tilt Boogie, that was made about the filming of From Dusk Till Dawn, and I think it was in that interview. Tarantino and Rodriguez were talking about how, the characters, it sort of starts off slow and then they find themselves in this, crazy situation. It's like you're kind of going along with the actors, so it's moving. They're kind of moving towards this thing, and you're kind of
Mhm.
going along with them, and so it doesn't drag. But this show's kind of the same thing. They get this case, they work on it for years and years and years. There's these other things that happen, and then all of a sudden they're in this extreme, life or death kind of situation. And so it just, I thought of, I was like, yeah, the pacing, and I don't think they took inspiration from Dusk Till Dawn, but I think people get what I mean in terms of that you're kind of going along with the character, because they don't know what's going to happen next. They don't know that
Yeah.
the case is going to be way bigger than they ever could have imagined it would be when they
Yeah.
initially saw the corpse in the cane field.
Yeah. Well, Pizzolatto definitely, this is Southern Gothic in extremis, and
Mhm.
Southern Gothic as a genre doesn't often interest me, and it's one of those things that should. But I did a stream on Southern Gothic and covered many of the many of the landmark and monolithic things in works in Southern Gothic, especially with poetry and prose, and a couple of the films that sort of mark this, especially from black and white into the postmodern era and into the 21st century. There's a kind of evolution here, but he also took inspiration, I see, from a kind of Marquez and Borges, the kind of labyrinth, which is a magical realism that occurs in this series, because the for one thing, with the you make a great point with the leading up to the extreme event, uh, the even the symbolism, this kind of swirl, the creeper swirl that we see as a powerful symbol throughout the whole thing, that's marked on the victims and then in the sky, is a kind of vortex that's not only leading the characters into this thing from which they can't escape, but it's also leading the audience into this thing. And a lot of people, when they, whatever you call it, when they wake up, when they get based, when they get super base pilled, they reach a point of no return, and this certainly plays into that, I think, in people's consciousness in a way that they may not even realize. This and things like Franklin scandal certainly are tied in with one another, and McMartin, and it's all the same universe. One thing I really like about the show and the series is that the first 3 seasons have a thematic approach where the things are united. The series and the seasons are united in the corruption of usually industry. That's why in the opening credits, we often see whatever the Tuttles have as representative of this elite strata of society with the darkness underlying it. We often see cityscapes or factoryscapes, and you really go back and watch season 1, and you notice how much the Tuttle industry is in the background. It's looming over almost every scene when they're outside. It's right in their face. And that plays to one of the, some of the themes of how the corruption and degradation are right in your face. And it's that thing about, revelatory creeper stuff that and the revelation of the method, like right in your face, but you don't realize it, and you realize it going back and watching it, how prevalent it is, and it's right there lying to your face. And the 3 seasons are united in that. Where they went wrong with Night Country, which we covered, was they tried to unite it through the characters, and they tried to draw this kind of provenance from Rust Cole back to his dad in Alaska, and it was a loose thread that they probably they didn't have anything else. And so they tried to there's a factory and there's corruption in the factory, but they did too much with the characters. And I think that they did that because, like Quentin Tarantino said on that Rogan podcast, movies and television shows have become, and they certainly, in the few years that we've seen the evolution of the great television shows and then their drop off, they do this thing where we've come to now when we watch a series, we forget the characters, we forget the action, we forget the events, and there are no quotable lines. Whereas this has tons of all of that stuff. It's like infinitely quotable, and it's very, very good, and it truly is like an 8-hour movie. And of course, Tarantino would probably like this because of the nonlinear storyline, but that is essential to understanding it because it shows that the stuff they're doing is outside of time. The time is sort of used for their own purposes, and they're the Yellow King is trying to immunize a new eon. It's like a Crowleyan eon. I just reread this book, by the way, this Aleister Crowley book by Gary Lockman, and it's amazing. It's amazing how much Crowleyan stuff is also in this.
Yeah.
There's so much sort of beyond voodoo, beyond witchcraft, beyond anything occult. It's the overall wickedness that pervades this show, and it is so well done. Of course, with its Southern Gothic bogscapes and its characters who are damaged. And one more thing about this, I think that the reason that the acting in this show is so great, especially from McConaughey and his playoff with the straight man played by Woody Harrelson, and they always play brothers. They were in Ed TV together. They were in a romantic comedy together. They play good brothers. You believe that they're brothers. But one of the reasons why it's so great is because the characters are giving everything that they have in the story, and they seem like they're going to go beyond death. Like they seem like they are living already in some sort of other side spirit world. And that is a kind of meta look at how the actors work in the filming of the script, because it seems like both characters, not just McConaughey, but also Woody Harrelson, like they are giving everything that they have in terms of their skill and their craft, as you say, as an actor. And that is very rare. That's really rare to have a thing that allows them to breathe like that.
Yeah, no, it's very, very good points there. I mean, yeah, the Crowleyan elements, and I hadn't even thought about the fact that, yeah, like the Tuttle Industries is sort of looming over everything ever. I hadn't even picked up on that. So that's a really good observation. And yeah, two things I wanted to hit, and obviously this is not a review channel, but one of the things that made this season so good, it's the leading cast, right? It's the top billed cast, but the performances from the smaller roles, like the guy that played Reggie, Charles, what's his last name? Halford, I think. The guy that played DeWall, the guy that played, who's the guy that was married to Dora? The guy who was in prison. Charlie, I think was his name. Charlie, the guy who played Miss Dolores. The lady who worked for the Tuttles. The guy who played whichever one of the Tuttles it was. And that guy, this was interesting. I appreciated the fact that guy, and obviously that guy and his whole ministry and everything was obviously based on Billy Tuttle. He was obviously based on Jimmy Swaggart and his whole organization. Now, I'm not saying Jimmy Swaggart. I've never seen. Obviously, Jimmy Swaggart had a taste for prostitutes, but it was hilarious. People may remember this when he said the first time he got caught with prostitutes, he was he was like weeping and crying and begging for forgiveness. The second time he got caught with prostitutes, he said, "God told me it's none of your business," which I always thought was kind of hilarious. But Jimmy Swaggart and even the middle name, Jimmy Swaggart's middle name is Lee. So his name is Jimmy Lee Swaggart, and this guy's name was Billy Lee Tuttle. And sort of, the way he dressed, the way he sort of talked, and obviously he's not playing Jimmy Swaggart. I don't know the actor's name, but that whole ministry and everything. And again, I've never seen any evidence of Jimmy. So I don't think he's involved in the kind of things the Tuttles were involved in. To be clear, but I'm saying that the inspiration I think was pretty clear, coming from Jimmy Swaggart, and so yeah,
Jimmy
just
Swaggart
feels.
from Virginia.
Oh, they're from Louisiana.
I don't think so. There's one of them. I get them confused. There's Billy Graham, Jimmy Swaggart, and who's the other one? There's Jerry
Benny Hannon.
Falwell, and there's another one.
Benny
Who's the
Hannon.
one who was cousins with Jerry Lee Lewis? I think that's Jimmy Swaggart, isn't it?
Yeah, Jimmy Swaggart. Yeah, him and Jerry Lee Lewis are cousins.
Yeah, he's from Virginia. Yeah, and
Okay.
and he also had that Supreme Court case. He's one of the thing. I took a class on law when I was in prep school. I took a class on law, and one of the Supreme Court cases we read was the one about suing celebrities and libel, and that was the Larry Flint, which is weird because he's played by Woody Harrelson, of course. There's a great Norm Macdonald. So Larry Flint had put
Larry Flint. I didn't catch the last name.
Yeah, Larry Flint had put a satirical, he'd written a thing with Jimmy Swaggart, and Jimmy Swaggart had sued him, and this led to the Supreme Court case about you're a public figure, so you're not a private citizen anymore. And that was interesting because Norm is also in The People versus Larry Flint. There's a great scene in The People versus Larry Flint where, Norm, I'm going to tell my Norm. This is my Norm bit for the night. So Norm was at dinner with Milos Forman and like the Chinese premier. And he was like, I don't fucking know what I'm doing with these guys. And Milos was like, what do you think of the situation in the Balkans? And Norm was like, I don't ask this fucking guy. He's a diplomat, And then they asked the diplomat about comedy. But anyway, Milos Forman was like, how would you like to be in this movie of Larry Flint? So he's in the movie, The People versus Larry Flint. And there's a scene where he's a journalist and he has to drive up to the house and he's getting the scoop at night. And he's like, you will drive up and you will get out. And Norm was like, I don't drive. And he was like, well, then you will take a taxi. So in the movie, in the middle of the night, the taxi pulls up and Norm gets out of it because he didn't drive. It's very weird when you go back and watch it. But you're talking about the actors. Glenn Fleshler is the guy who of course plays Childress, and he's fantastic. He's in Billions. He's in The Nick. He's in Barry, and he is Broadway. You look at this guy, you just know he's a Broadway actor. That's why in episode 8, he's sort of dissociating into these different states, and he's a large looking guy. He kind of looks like Mr. Jingles, the guy who plays Mr. Jingles that I like so much. But kind of bald. He's got one of those donut cuts. But he's fantastic. You're right. All of the supporting actors. Let's not forget Alexandra Daddario. Who is by far the best part of this whole show. Not simping, she just is. And I remember reading a thing about her where she said that she said on the night the episode aired, which is, I think it's episode 1, where Alexandra Daddario seduces Woody Harrelson. That night, as soon as she had her scene, her phone started ringing off the hook from her agent. Her agent was like, you've got 1 million offers to be in and all this stuff. And she was like, I wonder why. It's like, no shit. But anyway.
So Jethro said it was Jerry Falwell is from Virginia. Jimmy Swaggart from
Jerry Falwell.
Louisiana.
Okay, it's Falwell. Okay.
They're in Lynchburg.
Thank you, Jethro. And Jethro also was talking about Dexter earlier, and Jethro got me into it. My favorite thing about Dexter was the snowy season. I like shows about snow.
Mm-hmm.
That's it.
But you didn't like Night Country?
Well, I actually did. I enjoyed watching it, but my favorite thing to watch is now I come home and I turn on National Geographic and I watch cliff climbing in Greenland.
Nice.
That's like I just want normal shit, and I just want to be able to think about living, in Greenland. I'm trying to write that movie this summer about Greenland, so I also want to go there. Yeah. But yeah, I like snow. I like snow and post-apocalyptic shit.
That's that's the best. I'm a big fan of
Hmm.
Snow, and
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I'm not going to rehash the whole Night Country thing. The series, people can go listen to our analyses of it. It had potential, and they blew it. I'll just say that.
Tuck, tuck,
I
McGluck.
enjoyed the
Yeah.
first few episodes, and then it just. But anyway, yeah. To get into what I was going to say, so I had a whole thesis about the show. And I was debating on if I wanted to throw it out there at the beginning or at the end. But we're not going to do this in an exactly linear kind of format. So here's my thesis about the show because, and follow me on this. Um, every cult, which the Tuttle cult, the Carcosa cult, whatever you want to call it, every cult kind of has a goal. There's something that they want to achieve, and it's not just. I mean, I don't know. I'm not an expert on cults. There's probably cults that just want to do weird, creepy things, but I think that there's some goal, and I think the goal that this cult has is to break outside of time. That is their ultimate goal. And I wrote some notes with this. And I will have to get to them because I can't remember all the exact quotes because I have like I don't know 7 or 8 pages of notes here. But there's there's the quote. Obviously the famous quote where Reggie said, "Oh, you'll do this again. Time is a flat circle. I saw you in my dream." And there's perhaps the most, and I was telling you this when we were on the phone the other night, is perhaps the most perceptive character in the whole show is DeWall, right? Reggie's sidekick, because as soon he's only in like what 2 scenes, and as soon as he sees McConaughey, he reads him as if he's known him for his whole life. And there was something else that Errol said. Again, I don't have the note right in front of me right now. I'll have to look for it later. But um, is that there seems to be this desire to kind of break outside of time, which is to sort of, in a way, to say become God, right? Because God is the only one who exists, who's not constrained by time. And the thing with McConaughey, and I think that why, part of the reasons why Reggie seems to, he almost seems to like, there's a recognition from him and DeWall and Errol that he's sort of what there's some kind of kinship that you can see there. And I think it's because McConaughey basically wants the same thing because we see how he takes that quote from he even says to the detective, he's like, "Oh, someone once told me time is a flat circle. Everything we've ever done, we'll do again." And it's also, I think that's the same. I can't remember if the exact same one, if it's the same scene, but he also says, like, "Why do I have to exist in history?" Right. So it's like he wants to break out of this. He doesn't want to be constrained by time. He doesn't want to be subject to the laws of the universe. It's just that he's not the things that the Tuttles and Reggie and DeWall and Errol are willing to do to try to achieve that. He's not willing to do that. Does that make sense? Like they can see, oh, he's sort of on the same wavelength as we are, so to speak. But it's almost like as if they're trying to pull him in to what they're doing. But
Hmm.
Rust is does not have, even though he may want that, he's not willing to do the things because he has a as it's not perfect, obviously, but he does have a moral compass
He
on
does.
some level. He does have a code of ethics. Whether the ethics I would agree with, probably not, but he does have, and this. I thought we got into this a little bit when we did the Sicario stream a while back. Is that talking about Alejandro, Benicio del Toro's character, is that any of the violence he dishes out, it's all calculated, it's not excessive, there's no enjoyment to it, it's all a means to an end. Like he's not going out just trying to harm people for the sake of harming people. It's part of the process. And the same thing with McConaughey, with Rust, I should say, is that everything. That's just one example of kind of that moral and ethical code. Is that um, like the scene where they're trying to get the information from those guys about trying to find the hooker ranch or whatever, and the guys are like, "Oh no, don't know anything about it," and then he goes in, splits one of their heads open with a toolbox and breaks the other one's arm. It's like, all right, got what we need. And it's
Yeah.
just it's a cold calculated, almost clinical kind of attitude towards violence. Is that there's no sadism to it. It's just, this is what I have to do to get what I need to, get to the end of what I'm trying to do.
Yeah, I like that. I think that the time is a flat circle thing is, to me, again, there's a lot of Crowleyan stuff in this, and I think that that is essentially like gyroscopic. It's like I think of Yeats and the poem "The Second Coming," turning and turning in the widening gyre. The falcon, kind of hear the falconer. Things fall apart. It's like the way that the way that most people see time is linear. You have a timeline, and the way that magical thinking sees time is a kind of it's not that time recurs, but it's that there are sort of swirling circles of time that occur on that hit the timeline, and those are eons. And those are the Crowleyan eons. They're the sort of golden dawn eons, and they are monumental, momentous, repeating cycles of time. And that the not to mention the fact that the cult all you were talking about cults and things that all cults share. One thing that all cults share is sex magic, and this is they all seem to share, like you were they definitely, the Tuttles go beyond just blackmail. They go beyond, oh, you're in the ritual and you're blackmailed. It goes into a kind of sex magic ritual, which is a control and creating a new dark universe in a satanic sense. I've just been teaching Paradise Lost for like the 400th time, and there's a thing that Tuttle, that not Tuttle. What's the main guy's name? Uh,
Errol Childress.
Errol Childress. Yeah, with the Childress. There's a thing Childress says in episode 8, Form and Void, where he says something along the lines of, I can see the glittering plane, the
The
infernal
infernal plane.
the infernal plane
Yeah.
glittering. It's something about the radiant infernal plane, and this is exactly Paradise Lost. And the point of book 1 of Paradise Lost is that Satan and the fallen angels realize that they have been beaten. And they say, this proves God's monarchy and majesty and his power. We can't win. So the point is, to do aught good never shall be our aim. Better to reign in hell than serve in heaven. Their thing is to always look at the good things in creation and to pervert them. And if God makes the crooked way straight, then to invert those or to pervert those. And that is exactly what these guys are doing. And that is what lends credence to their power. Their sort of uh, Satan is called many-throned powers, chief of many-throned powers in Paradise Lost. And that's what these guys are sort of doing. They are holding sway over the world through all of the wickedness, but it's not just straight up wickedness. There's a lot that's lying and that's subtle, and that's Rust Cole to me represents a kind of crossover Nietzschean postmodern Saint Michael figure. He's supposed to be someone who's guarding the sheep, and the good. You got to have good people doing bad things to weed out the bad people. But he also seems to go through this arc where at the beginning of the show he's so angry and everything is so nothing. It's just evolutionary, accidental nothingness, and he's just trying to live according to his Nietzschean will. But by the end of the show, he's clearly searching for some sort of redemption, and he finds it by doing the deed, by finding the bad guy, and he dedicates his whole life to him. Like, he doesn't even sleep. He doesn't sleep. He just dreams. He sort of lives in this kind of surrealistic world, this hellish world where he has been put on the front line to guard against these other things. And he says when he watches the video for the first time, he's like, I can't turn away. Nothing can make me turn away anymore. So even though he lacks the moral or the Christian ideal which would be the foundation of those things. Somehow he's still searching for it. I think that's why he's Rust Cole. The whole thing is the industry that they're looking at seems to be working and functioning, but it's full of rust and full of like everything around them is rotting. It's like in Thin Red Line. Nature's cruel, Starles. Look at the way those vines are twirling or twisting around everything. That's him. And also that he's he's the Billy Joe Shaver chunk of coal. He's an old chunk of coal, but Lord, he's going to be a diamond one day. So he's searching for something. And it's crazy because the playoff between him and Woody Harrelson's character is that it's actually Woody Harrelson. Woody Harrelson is the Christian, but he's also worse. But that actually makes sense in the world because he's aware of why he's worse and aware of his own sin. And it takes Matthew McConaughey to the series to sort of buy into what sin even is. He knows what the bad guys are doing is sin, but he also somehow has this moral compass. I think it's a really good almost. I mean, there's something Shakespearean about the arc that the characters undergo. This journey that they take from the beginning of it to the end, which really conveys the complexity of what makes a human being.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, very, very well said. And I found the quote I was looking for. It was actually not Errol who said it. It was the woman, half sister, whatever she was, that he was living with. When Marty asks her where Billy Childress is, she says, "All around us, before you were born and after you die." And and I have a bunch of notes, and we can get to it if later, not to to the entire end of the series at the beginning, but he says, Errol says that. Let me see. Where's the quote? I wrote it down. Oh, right before. So right when Errol stabs Rust in Carcosa, he tells him, "Take off your mask." And just before that, he said that Rust blessed Reggie and DeWall, and he referred to Reggie and DeWall as acolytes, and said that Rust blessed them. And I took that to mean that because he was the one well, I guess DeWall technically killed himself, but that he killed Reggie, and sort of DeWall, you could say that was sort of liberated in that, and even go back like the title of the stream, taken from the Miss Dolores, the woman that worked for the Tuttles. She said, "Death is not the end. Rejoice." And so it's this idea. It seems to point to this idea that Reggie and DeWall and Errol seem to. I'm kind of jumping around, but to try to narrow this down, they seem to have some kind of clairvoyance of where. And I think when Errol tells him, "Take off your mask," that's him again recognizing something in Rust and telling him like, "Oh, this moral and ethical." He's incorrectly assessing that this moral and ethical code that Rust, it's something he's hiding behind. It's a mask that he's actually one of them. And so the idea that even though someone is dead, if you're Christian, you believe that in eternal life, but it's not in. So they would say probably the same thing, that even if you die, and that's sort of a. And as I understand it, it's kind of in certain strains of Satanism, it's like a satanic kind of idea that death is not it's sort of a liberation from the body. And so it's not like when you die, it's not like an atheist idea of, where you just go on the ground and rot and that's it. It's all over. And so that's again why, Billy Childress, all around us before you were born and after you died, that there's this kind of thing where they're always existing, and maybe for only a time they're existing in human form.
Yeah, the take off your mask thing is interesting because of the idea of the persona, that everyone is wearing a mask, and yet it's ironic that the worst person in this is not wearing a mask.
Yeah.
And that his face seems like everybody identifies him by what looks like a mask, the spaghetti monster, the pock marks, the burn marks around his face, but that is actually him. And the point with him and being the lawnmower man is that people come across him and they don't even bother to ask him who he is or what he's doing. He just gives them information, and he's telling them the truth. It's equivocation. He just doesn't tell them the whole truth. And it turns out that he is actually living according to his infernal will the whole time. He has this whole universe, this, Carcosa, where this reminded me a lot, by the way, of Son of Sam, and what Son of Sam said about hell, and why Samhain told him to do what he did. He said this in his interviews. He said that, and in his letter, he said that Samhain, the demon, spoke through the dog to tell him that he was collecting slaves for hell, so that he would be a master of those slaves in hell. And that's sort of exactly what the Tuttles and Childress are doing. They are, this cult is supposed to mimic the kind of infernal rituals that they do in hell and the on the infernal plane, like his liberate. That's the whole point of Crowley too. In the book that I just read reinforces that the whole point of love love is the law, love under will, and do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. The law, there is no law. The only law is self-service, which is ultimately making yourself into a god so that you can live forever. That's also Paradise Lost. That's also the promise of the serpent in the Garden of Eden, that if you just do these things, you can live forever. They already live forever.
Mm-hmm.
They already live in paradise, but Satan tempts them with a double tongue and tells them that they can live forever like gods. And so all these people, their control and their infernal spirit is the control over other people, the control of life and over them with life and death. So it's ironic that they live that way. And I love what you said about what's his face confronting McConaughey, because it's the same in the same thing. We talked about this before. The same thing happens in No Country for Old Men, where Anton Chigurh meets two people that escape his wrath in the film. One is the old guy who flips a coin. He escapes by chance, right? You've been putting it up your whole life, right? And the other is the woman, the big globular jawbone woman. I said we don't have no vacancies, and that's the only woman in the movie that Chigurh walks kind of back away from, and he sees that he's met his match, and she reads him for who he is, just like in True Detective when he meets the guy in the bar. And McConaughey has nothing. Ruskell has nothing to say when the guy says that, because he reads him for exactly, his mask has been torn off, and he knows exactly who he is. That's why he's looking at his eyes.
Yeah, and I mean he always has some kind of response to everything. He's got it's something, but then DeWall walks in and is like, "Nah, I don't want your money, I don't want your business," and then reads him for who he is, and he's just speechless. Yeah, he's got nothing. He's like, "Dang, like no, this guy's right. He's figured me out."
Yeah,
and
it's a scary moment in the series.
It's
pretty terrifying.
All of those moments with DeWall and Reggie and Errol, and those are deeply unsettling. And it's interesting because Errol is sort of able to, because Reggie and DeWall sort of exist outside of society. The only time like Reggie gets has any kind of interaction with society is like when he does something and gets locked up for it, right? And DeWall, I don't think they ever mention anything about him being arrested or in prison or anything like that, because they're sort of off the grid. Like they're way far out there. They're away from everything. They don't really interact. Whereas Errol is the guy, that's painting the gym at the school, the outside of the gym. He's mowing the grass, and he's sort of like a chameleon in the sense that he can present himself as this, sort of harmless, just everyday working man type of guy. And the way he talks is it's almost different in every scene, and sometimes it changes throughout the scenes that
as if he's
in.
a demon inhabiting this body.
Yes, exactly. It's like whatever he needs, whatever sort of spirit needs to come out of him comes out at the right time. So when he's talking to the cops, he kind of has this disarming, just down home kind of accent. And then as soon as they drive away, he has that thing where it's like you can see, like later on when the two newer detectives, I can't think of their names, come up, and he's telling them like where to go, like giving him directions, and then he starts talking about, oh, and then they drive off, and then it's like you can almost see this physical change come over him, and then his
Yeah.
voice totally changed, and he has that, my family's been here a long time. Another thing where that change takes place, and this is maybe, and I didn't even really pick up on this until this time around watching it, one of the most perhaps disturbing moments in the whole series is when he's at that gym, he's at that school, he's painting the gym,
Yeah.
and or the lunchroom, whatever, it looked like a gym, whatever it was on the outside, he's painting it, and the kids come outside for recess, and it's like it's almost like he's going into a trance. He's
Hmm.
watching the children, and I'm not going to say that would come out the wrong way, but it's like you can see him kind of getting, I don't want to say this, it's like you can,
Energized.
yeah, you can see him getting energized. It's kind of like he's getting turned on, but in like not like a normal kind of way, like a demon taking
Yeah.
over. It's like you can sort of see this evil. And I mean, this is just a testament to how great of an actor Glenn Fleshler is. I mean, the guy's outstanding, and you can. And then he kind of snaps out of it when the teacher is like, "Oh, I can get you a lunch from the cafeteria if you'd
Yeah.
like," and he's like, "Oh no, thanks, but I got to keep working." But it's
I
like you can
saw.
see that as he's, just the being in the presence of children
Yeah.
is this sort of like demon of perversity, you might
I
say,
saw
kind of
something.
coming out of him.
Yeah, I saw something kind of on the other side of that, which was that, children are closer to God, and that this child walks up and looks at him and stares at him. And children often, do that to
Yeah.
people. But this seemed to be another instance, kind of like in No Country for Old Men, where a child has a closer kind of spirit of some of purity, and sees this person for who he is, but doesn't recognize what it is because it's a child.
Hmm.
So it's almost like two different characters meeting each other in a different world.
Interesting.
And there's also something to be said for, you, you know Jason makes a good point about looking closer. He says, the movie American Beauty, look closer as a theme. Gives us this line: "Our marriage is a commercial. We're actually far from normal during the raining garage." It's a good point, Jason, because looking closer at this scene, you get all of these facades, and just beyond the pale, just beyond the paint, just beyond the door, we have these almost Wiccan looking voodoo, sigils and creepy nature things hanging everywhere. Of course, this finds its maximum point in the thing that starts the whole show, which is the reversal ritual, and the girl put through the tree, back into nature with the thing painted on her and the antlers, and as if she is prey, and as if she is part of the most dangerous game. We see the two most terrifying moments in the show, if you guys remember, are obviously when they go to the meth camp or whatever, and they find the shipping container. It's just awful. It's just the most awful. It's the most awful scene, and you're also glad for what Marty Hart does. It's interesting also because the deer antlers and a heart is a deer. So Marty Hart is full of heart, but he's also, with the sort of pun and language, he's also like a white hart. The white hart is a symbol in Arthurian literature, where it's a symbol of purity in nature. So it's like we have this character who comes out and he does what we all wish that he would do right after that, and the guy gets smoked. And he doesn't need to, and it's great because he doesn't even need to explain it. What's great about Rust and him is that at this moment, they're always arguing in the car, and they have these great and it's actually a very funny show, like when they have their exchanges in the car, because of how dark Rust is, and with Marty looking over at him, his eye, just, you can't say that shit, man, that kind of thing. But when they're actually in the moment, they're totally in the same wavelength, and he doesn't need to say anything, and they're gonna take care of the situation like they should, and he's there for him at the very end. They save each other in the show, and this is one of the best buddy cop things ever, because they are so far apart, and the way that he actually violates his relationship with his wife also, but somehow it works towards a good end in the series is amazing. And they end up in, you keep hearing Carcosa, and the last thing I'll say is I think Carcosa, besides being Chambers, Yellow King, Robert W. Chambers and Yellow King Place mixed with a kind of Lovecraftian outer world, it's almost like a district in hell. It's like a place in the seventh circle or something. It's like a place full of absolute chaos where these particular titans or these particular demons dwell. And what's interesting is the flood that is constantly looming over the place, because they're in high water Louisiana. They've got Katrina is sort of looming over the series, and it's almost like you can see why God's wrath floods over this place, because there's just so much wickedness. And of course, it's supposed to be an allegory for the wickedness everywhere, and especially in industry and in power structures. But it's like this whole principality where wickedness just reigns and rules over everything, and there are very few people who are trying to stand up against it, and everybody sort of gets tainted by it until it's going to get flooded over.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent point, and that's a sort of, and there's mentions of multiple hurricanes throughout the series, and that these hurricanes, they keep hitting this area, and I think it was in episode 1. McConaughey even or Rust even says, like, this place will probably be underwater in 20 years or whatever it is, 30 years.
Yeah, primordial.
And yeah, I think that the point about Carcosa being, because that whole stone labyrinth in Form and Void is, I think that's sort of like a temple, even though, because it's sort of called Carcosa, but it's like, this is a temple
with an altar.
Yes, with an altar. This is a temple to these demons in this realm, and I've been wanting to. I actually bought the Chambers book. I haven't read it yet. I think it's in storage right now. I need to get it out. But about the King in Yellow, and then it also draws from like the Ambrose Bierce, one of his books, and then from Lovecraft as well, because there was another name for that god of. Was it Hastur or something like that? And Hastur, I was doing a little bit of. I try not to do too much research or reading on this series, because I didn't want anything to kind of influence it aside from just my own analysis. I did see a few things here and there, but because I was doing a little bit of reading with the Yellow King, but according to something I read, is this Hastur, which I think the Hastur comes from Lovecraft, but that, and I don't think it's ever explicitly referred to as that in the series. It's called about the Yellow King. But anyway, what I'm getting at is that this Hastur demon is what it said. It was like the god of, or like I think it was like a god of some kind of shepherds. And there are multiple, like one of the Tuttle schools that they used as a way to obtain children for their rituals. One of them was called, I think I wrote down the title of it, but it was called something about the shepherd. And so it's sort of I don't know, maybe this is a reach, but it's kind of like it's sort of shepherding victims into their into their cult, into their perversity, into their rituals, and under the guise of being shepherds, of trying to reach out to these disadvantaged, poor, rural children, and shepherd them into the right thing, of like Christian teaching and good education, and all of that. And one thing that, because there's mentions of like voodoo and Santeria and all that in the series, but I kept thinking that if we think of European paganism, or like the Druid, and I know there's not a whole lot known about the Druids, but that sort, the way like the Dora's body was posed at the beginning, it kind of had this sort of pagan kind of look. There's a lot of pagan elements, and one thing I noticed is at Errol's plantation, they had that building. I think it was the building that Billy Childress's body was decomposing in.
Yeah.
There's a drawing of a Celtic cross on the building, up kind of near where the roof comes to a point. And so that kind of made me wonder: is this is like a mishmash of all different kinds of, paganism? So you have like the voodoo, the Santeria, but then it's like, is this some kind of, I don't know, some of those Palo Mayombe, some of these religions kind of draw from Roman Catholicism.
Yeah.
And so it made me wonder also, is there some kind of weird syncretism of Christianity and like Celtic paganism, because the obviously what they're doing is not Christian, but again, because when the like Roman Catholicism, and with Celtic, that would have been Orthodoxy before that, before it was Roman Catholic, but it kind of got meshed into these sort of pagan religions of the native people of the places like Haiti and Ireland and
Yeah,
wherever
that's
else.
that Cajun Creole.
Yeah.
This is the place for it, right? With the like you were saying, the West African sort of, and then into Haitian voodoo mixed with I mean, Louisiana is interesting because it was French, it was Spanish. It has a heavy the slave trade. Mixes in all this sort of mishmash of stuff with like you said, with this kind of druidical Celtic pan worship in there. Also, there's some sort of I keep thinking of like a Typhonian. One of the offshoots of the OTO is the OHO, the Typhonian order,
Mhm.
which is like the crossing of the abyss. That's essentially what the characters are doing, and that's what happens when you walk into Carcosa. You cross it, you cross the abyss, and you sort of meet this Karanzan character, which is I can't remember his name. Is it what's the main bad guy's name? Not Tuttle.
Errol.
Errol Childress. Thank you. Yeah, and and also that he is living in a place where there's a reversal of life and death. He's talking to his dad, who's dead in the
Hmm.
bed, and also his sister is his wife, and he and it looks like a plantation, but everything is dead, and instead of a temple being up, it's down, and they have to descend into the place, but the descent doesn't really seem to make sense because they're already below sea level. So it's this sort of reversal of worlds that occurs, and the schools, certainly there's a heavy McMartin thing going on here,
Yeah.
but the episodes take us through various stages, almost like we're going through the circles of hell, because we meet people who continuously do like worse and worse, and the prostitution thing, until we end up with this detective who, when he's playing golf with him, that this guy is one of the bad guys, and as soon as he gets in the car and leaves, he's like, that's the guy. Marty Hart's like, that's the guy.
Oh,
And
Geraci, yeah.
yeah, and it perfectly shows that the how these things work, because it's cellular, right?
Hmm.
Because the guy had done one deed, and then he was forwarded in his career, and he didn't realize what it was, and then they have the tape of the thing, and also Rust is living amongst all of this stuff, and then they try to blame him for it. They try to character assassinate him, like he's the one who's been doing all the stuff. It goes through time. You see how it's rotted him from the inside out, and yet Marty's character is kind of thrived somehow through this thing until they make a pact, and he can't go back from it. Yeah, it's very tight show.
Yeah, no, and it's yeah. Was that Crowley, or was that
It's Crowley. Yeah,
that was okay? Because he had what was
Karanzan
it?
was the
Lamb.
demon of
That
the
was the other
abyss.
one. Yes,
Yeah,
Demon of
yeah.
the Abyss. That's
Well,
right.
Crowley has a bunch of them. A Lamb is the alien, interdimensional alien secret chief demon that he meets at Cefalù Abbey, and then Karanzan is the demon of the abyss that he meets in the Abra Melon ritual. But
Right.
there's a lot of Crowleyanism in this thing. In fact, the Gnostic mass that he did in London sort of is mimicked or mirrored in the way that Carcosa looks. Also, I forgot this. One of the biggest synchros that I've ever had was back in December. I became obsessed with the planet Aldebaran. I was like, looking at stars, watching stars, all this stuff, and there's all this stuff about Aldebaran. I've talked about it on streams. It's a big red star, and it's like up from Orion. It's like the ninth brightest star in the sky. It's red. it's a Ultima Thule and Agartha and all this stuff. But I was reading about Carcosa, and Carcosa apparently ties in and comes from Aldebaran. And it
Really?
said that in the article. I'm sitting there reading about Carcosa, and out of nowhere, these two things are totally unrelated, and it talks about Aldebaran.
Huh.
I thought that was very, very weird. I threw the phone down when I saw that. I went, "Get out of here! Get out of here! Get out of here!"
Oh, that's a trip.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, couple things because you mentioned the schools with the McMartin connection, and I noticed that because season 3 of True Detective went a lot more into sort of the so-called satanic panic, but there's a lot of elements of it in here where they kind of hint at things going on, like in the first episode where they go to that church, and the preacher mentions, oh yeah, there's been dead cats turned inside out, nailed to the church door.
Mm-hmm.
There's a mention of the tent revival preacher who Shea Wiggum. He was so good
Yeah,
in that
he's
role.
great. Yeah.
He's great in it. He's one of those guys good in everything, but he was especially good in this. He talks about vandalism. So they're like the church burned down. They said it was
Mm-hmm.
faulty wiring or whatever. And there's sort of these references to this the sort of activity of people doing weird, kind of dark, creepy thing. Is it just kids being weird? Is there some kind of satanic activity? And I wrote the quote down. I just wanted to go back to this for a second. This is at the beginning of episode 8, where Errol is just kind of hanging out in the house. And he sort of goes into these different accents. Actually, does a really good British accent, which most Americans cannot do a very good British accent. But
Well, he's a trained actor.
Exactly.
We more than trained soldiers. We trained actors. Yeah, so he's a trained actor.
Yeah, but he says, "My ascension removes me from the disc and the loop. I'm near final stage. Some mornings I can see the infernal plane."
Mm-hmm.
And something that's interesting is this. One of the things I actually like about this show is this season is that, and Billy Bob Thornton talked about this several years back, and he kind of got made fun of for it, is that the people in the South always kind of get presented as these like bumbling idiots, and there's like a heavy Southern kind of anti-Southern bias in film. And even though some of one of the things with the characters is that if you're ever around people from like rural areas, blue collar type of people, some of the smartest people I've ever met have been people I met working like blue collar industrial kind of jobs. And that's something you see with characters like again, Errol, Reggie, DeWalt. These are not good people. These are really evil people. But if you look, like, Errol's got books, and he's got a big stacks of VHS tapes. He's got books all over the house, and he's it's kind of well spoken, probably not educated. He seems to be kind of off the grid his whole life, but is obviously not stupid. And then some of the other characters that they meet, like was it Dora Lang's uncle or granddad? Like, he's clearly not dumb. Like, he knows what he can perceive, that they're Marty and Rust are after something, and they're not being totally forthcoming with him, and so some of the other characters. So anyway, that was just kind of an aside.
The people that Childress uses are Hicks, but he is not, and he
Right.
looks like it because of where he lives, and but he's a demon. He's not a Hick. And when he talks about his family has been there since the beginning, he's talking about old money and old plantation money in the new world. And people forget that a lot, that the high class, especially the antebellum high class, and the tobacco money and the cotton money, they sent their children off to the best schools, and to Eton, and to William and Mary, or to Harvard, or to Oxford. And watch Gone with the Wind and see where that happens. Remember, he takes his daughter to London to go to boarding school, and that happens. There's a thing that with Val Kilmer, who recently passed away, and how he came up with the accent for Tombstone, and he says that he says erroneously that it's a dead accent when he talks about it, but his accent is not dead at all. That's how people here talk. He thinks it's a Georgian accent, and it probably partly is, but I know people that talk like that. And this is an old Southern landed gentry agrarian gentleman type of accent, and it's very close to an English accent. Probably the closest in Shakespearean study, the closest thing to the way that they would speak in Elizabethan England would be either the English Bristolian accent or the American Southern accent. And especially, there's a place in America where they still speak an Elizabethan dialect, and that's Tangier Island. In the Chesapeake Bay in Virginia. And Tangier Island is just like, this is one of the reasons why I like the show so much, because Tangier Island is just like this place because it's sinking. It blocks of the place sink every year. There are 2 last names in Tangier Island. Everyone there is related to one another, so it becomes spooky and incestuous, I'll say. And I've never been. I don't really want to go. My uncle had a I've told a story about my uncle and his boat and the strange experience there, which was the guys boarded his boat and they refused to get off. And then they were all drinking. They were all drinking whiskey. One of the guys dropped on the floor, and then he said, "What's wrong with him?" And they said, "Oh, he did." And they just kicked him off into the water. Their own friend, and they got in a canoe and just went off, and it was like, okay, never coming back here. And so there are places like this. There's also the quote about the infernal plane reminds me of that quote in From Hell near the end, where Jack the Ripper, who's Dr. William Gull, who's played by Ian Holm in the film, says, I shall tell you where we are. We're in the darkest region of the human brain, a radiant abyss where men go to find themselves. A radiant abyss. It's the same as I can almost see the infernal plane. Mm-hmm. And by the way, I read Ambrose Bierce's short story, and I've got the poem that begins. Anybody want to hear the poem? You can't, I guess I can't hear you if you say something back. I'm a boomer. How does this work?
Go ahead.
It says, this is Carcosa, and it says, along the shore, the cloud waves break, the twin suns sink behind the lake, the shadows lengthen in Carcosa. Strange is the night where black stars rise and strange moons circle through the skies, but stranger still is lost Carcosa. Songs that the Hyades shall sing, where flap the tatters of the king must die unheard in dim Carcosa. Song of my soul, my voice is dead. Die thou unsung as tears unshed shall dry and die in lost Carcosa. That's an extremely Crowleyan dark poem because black stars, the Hyades is where Aldebaran is. And then this is when I was reading, and it says, the name Holly originated Ambrose Bierce as an inhabitant of Carcosa, 1886, in which Holly is the author of a quote which prefaces the story. The narrator of the story implies that the person named Holly is now dead, at least in the timeline of the story, and several other nearly undescribed places are alluded to in Chambers' writing, among them Hastor, which you mentioned, Yitil, and Aldebaran. Mm-hmm. Aldebaran may also refer to the star Aldebaran, likely as it is also associated with the mention of the Hyades star cluster with which it shares space in the night sky. The yellow sign, described as a symbol not of any human script, is supposed to originate from the same place as Carcosa, which means that it's a kind of Enochian language or Enochian script.
Right.
And that also ties in with the show because it's one of the odd things. Sorry, my phone blowing up, y'all. I'm so popular on a Friday night. No. We got nothing to do. Because it's weird that Rust is always writing. He has this book that he carries around, and he writes and he inscribes and he makes these, inscriptions, and he writes everything down. They call him the tax. They call him the tax man, but actually, he's doing something hermetic here. Hermes is the god of writing, and I was just to go a little schizoidal here. I was talking to my good friend whose father passed away last weekend, and he is extremely smart. And we were talking about. I can't go into how he tied this together, but there's something about Hermes and hermetic writing and how Hermes is some sort of demon and makes his way to the Nordic countries, and Hermes is Odin,
Hmm.
because Odin is also the one who gives language to the Nordic pantheon. So he hangs upside down on Yggdrasil, which is an inverted Christianity, right? And then
Hmm.
finds the runes in the pool of the oblivion, and then gives language, which is magic, to people. And this is the
Hmm.
same with Hermes. Hermes Trismegistus, and Hermes, and mercurial thinking, mercurial writing seems to be inscribing things down that actuates it and actualizes it. So what's interesting is that Rust does all this stuff, but he's actually using this for something positive, not like white magic, it's all the same, but he is learning how these things work so that he can meet them at the gates, I guess.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Eh, Now, do you know if Bierce was he? Because I think him and Crowley's lives overlapped. Was he an occultist? Do you know? I actually don't know that much about Bierce. I
I
don't
don't know.
know if he was into any kind of. I mean, it is sort of Crowleyan language, but I didn't. I think he died in like what 19 something. It was the 19 teens, so he
Crowley?
probably
Crowley died
no.
at night.
Bierce died in it
Oh,
was like
okay.
the early 1900s. So their
I
lives
don't know.
overlapped on some, but I didn't know if he was if you knew if he was into any kind of weird occult kind of stuff. I wouldn't have been Thelema, but something along those
I
lines.
don't know. I've never really been into Ambrose Bierce. I did do an analysis of an occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge early on in the stream. That was something related to Southern Gothic, and I did that. I forget. It was like the third stream I did. I did an Ambrose
Mhm.
Bierce analysis. That's the short story where it's at the end of the War of Northern Aggression, and he's hanging, and then he drops to the bottom of that long rope, and it turns out he'd already been dead, or this was his
Mhm.
life flashing in front of him, in front of his eyes. But I don't know, and it wouldn't surprise me because Crowley was so had so many connections with other people. Like Crowley, for instance, scared Dylan Thomas. Did you know this?
Yes, I remember hearing
He
that.
yeah, he met Dylan Thomas at a pub, and he scared him through. He had him do the kind of Ingo Swan thing where you write shapes on a piece of paper, and then he mimicked and drew exactly what he'd drawn and presented it to him. And Dylan Thomas ran out saying, "I'm Welsh. I know what second sight is. I'm out of here."
Yeah.
He also, I did this analysis of T.S. Eliot and the biography of The Wasteland, and T.S. Eliot had cheated on his wife with Nancy Cunard from the Cunard White Star Line, and Nancy Cunard was one of the followers of Crowley. So that,
Oh, yeah,
yeah,
yeah. I forgot about that.
and he was not impressed with T.S. Eliot. He did not like him.
Yeah.
Crowley also said that astrology was like mainly bullshit.
Interesting.
Which is crazy. But a lot of this Carcosa reminds me of Cefalù Abbey
Hmm.
in Sicily, what he was doing there, before he was kicked out by Mussolini. By the way, uh, some would say based.
Yeah. I think so. I mean,
Yeah, yeah,
it's
yeah.
anybody who kicks out Crowley, it's like, yeah,
Out of
that
here.
guy's
Yeah,
uh, that guy was a freak.
yeah.
But yeah, well, one of the things that's interesting is, and a lot of times, and I don't say this to be critical, but in a lot of movies, in a lot of shows and things, when someone has a notebook when they're writing, we think of American Psycho, right? Bateman has
Mhm.
that, notebooks that he has his notebooks, he has a thing, right?
Meat,
He's
bone.
writing,
Yeah.
drawing, and then when Gene opens it up, his, day plan or whatever is looking through it, and it has all these, scribblings, like sketches of dismemberment and whatnot.
Oh, so acting so fucking sad all the time. Yeah.
I don't think we ever see the end. Not that I can recall, we don't ever see the inside of Rust's notebook. This big
Yeah.
book that he carries, and I actually kind of like that, is because it's sort of his own private thing. You can see he's sketching. Maybe there is at one point. I don't recall ever seeing inside of it, which I thought
We see him.
was a
Yeah, we
nice
see him
touch.
sketching the initial crime scene.
That
but
okay,
that's
that's
but
right,
that's
that's
it.
right.
We see it on his walls when we walk into his apartment. Right? Where's your bed?
Yeah.
I don't sleep. I just dream. Which is like the best line I've ever heard in a
Oh,
television
it's
show.
fantastic. One thing I wanted to mention, um, because we're just kind of. I'm losing my charging cord because we're just kind of all over the place here, and that's fine. One of the
Yeah.
things you mentioned, because I had a note about this. It's that first episode where Marty tells Rust, he's like, "Hey, you have to come over for dinner." And then Rust, it was like what was like his daughter's birthday, so he gets wasted and then shows up and is making it through dinner, and then his one of Marty's daughters asked Rust if he's ever shot somebody, and they sort of it's I thought it was kind of funny because they're basically implying that Rust is cooler than Marty because he shot people, even though I don't think he actually directly answers the question. He says something like, "It's not good to shoot people," and they're like, "Well, Dad's never shot anybody," and it's kind of like, "Oh, this guy's cool because he shot people." But since you mentioned the Tuttle thing hanging over, and this gets into this gets into like really dark territory, but when we think about Marty's older daughter, and Marty's he's going after this case, and this whole thing is happening. I don't want to say the exact same thing. There's people who've speculated about what this might have been, but if you look at like what she was doing with the doll, she one of the again, I don't want to get gross here, but just one of the hallmarks of people who have children who have been through horrific things like that is an advanced knowledge of, shall we say, adult activities that they would not otherwise have. And if you look at kind of the placement she had her dolls in at that one scene where Marty goes to get them for dinner, and he kind of looks at it and is just kind of like, oh, that's weird. And then her drawing these photos for like a child her age, especially with the dolls, like that's not something you just come up with. Like there's something she clearly has advanced knowledge about. So this is happening like right under his nose, and he even references like missing things later on in the show. I think when he's talking to the detectives, he talks about these things happening, and he's basically checked out and he doesn't get it. And something I found during I was researching something else, and I came across this. I came across this in the. I don't remember which episode because I just found the still frame of it. I don't remember which episode it's in, but there's a scene where someone had to be going frame by frame through this episode to find this, but they noticed that at Marty's house there's a scene where he's standing there and there's a wall behind him, and there's a drawing. It looks like a child's drawing tacked up onto the wall, and it's of the spiral symbol.
Mm.
And so that, and then there's further evidence of this, like with his daughter getting caught with the look,
Yeah.
kids as the teenagers do things, we all know that, whatever, but that kind of stuff, I'm like, that's beyond what.
Yeah.
And there's kind of this, she takes this dark turn and there's no explanation for it, and I think it's that, yeah, these things, and whether what happened, I think what happened, I don't, that may or may not have had something to do with the cult activities, but there is, again, is that he's trying to solve this thing, and it's like he never gets it. He never picks up on the fact that this is happening, not like right in front of, because he's always out drunk and
Yeah.
sleeping around and working and whatever, and it's kind of like he wants the best. So then, like when his family gets broken up, then it's like, oh well, now my life is ruined, and it's like, well, moron, like you did this
Yeah.
to yourself, and he kind of,
Yeah.
anyway. But yeah, that's I think one of the most disturbing parts of the series is that even through all of that, all the way till the end, it's like he never picks up on what was going on.
Yeah. He's blinded by the facade of convention, right? So he has his family, and he ought to be more worried. It seems to seep into his subconscious that he's worried about these things because that's why he smokes the guy, because he's got daughters,
Yeah,
and but but Rust, on the other hand, is already all the way on the line with what's happening, and he needs Marty as the straight man to kind of be a counterbalance to balance out his like obsession. So they need both sides of the coin in order to in order to solve the case, because both of them and both of them are separated through time, and then they rejoin at the end, which is kind of indicative of how time works with the cult.
Mhm.
And it ironically brings the two of them together in the case in the end. But yeah, it's almost like the clues are right in front of him, but he can't see them, because his mind is more set. His mind is set on solving crimes the conventional way, and then this is where Rust kind of comes in, um, to pick up the pieces, because they have such an unconventional crime that occurs. But even when they go and visit, what's this Tuttle at, at the school or whatever, or at the center, and he's like, just he's this big guy, and and they know right away that this is the bad guy,
Yeah,
because of how straight and narrow he is, and he won't give them the information. Or maybe that's just Marty who goes to see him.
yeah.
Um,
Or it's Rust who goes to see him.
or yeah, okay, yeah, oh yeah, you're right. It's Rust. I think that the best scene in the whole series is the uncut scene where they do the B&E, walking through the projects.
Oh yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
I mean, that scene is just so incredible, but it's also kind of pointless.
Hmm.
Like, it doesn't actually serve anything, because he was going to take the guy anyway and get him there. So he just does that to get back into this zone where he is where he's undercover again. And it ends up not even getting, it ends up with them finding the place, but it doesn't seem to work in the time and that shows you kind of all the red herrings and loose ends that they come up with in the show.
Yeah, I think that episode where they go off to the projects and pull the B and E. I mean,
Yeah.
I think it's good because it gives you. I think that the actually at first I thought that I didn't really understand it. The first maybe two or three times I watched the season is like, this doesn't make any sense. Like, why are they
Yeah.
doing this? This seems like a low point, but I think that it actually it seems like a bit of I don't know. I kind of go back and forth on if it's a low point or maybe not a
Yeah.
high point, but kind of an integral part of the series because I think that it shows that I think for one it shows that Rust when he doesn't, and granted he has to do what he's doing because to keep to not blow his cover, but it shows that whenever he sort of doesn't keep himself on the straight and narrow, he has no self control. So
Yeah.
he's just like doing line after line and smoking meth and all this, like
Hmm.
before they go on this. But even still, he realizes this is a bad idea. We shouldn't. He tries to minimize any of the violence, but I think it's also indicative of it's showing the sort of criminal underworld and what it's
Hmm.
actually like, and it also gives you an insight into this motorcycle club is the one that's like Errol and Reggie's only customers, and they
Yeah.
know these people, and like these bikers are just like horrible people.
Yeah.
And that
Hmm.
scene where that one biker's like running out and he gets like his head caved in with a bat and then gets executed, I was like,
Yeah.
yeah, that's what's up.
Uh-huh.
I mean, because like these are just like fundamentally evil people, and Ginger even tells Rust, he's like, I really live this outlaw lifestyle, like that's who he is,
Hmm.
and that's these are just like violent, depraved,
Yeah.
evil uh, kind of people. And I had there was something I was going to mention. You brought it up a second ago that I'm trying to remember what it
It,
was. I
it's
don't
like
know.
the
You'll
Manson
help me out.
family and the Straight Satans, the biker gang, being
Oh yeah,
an arm of the cult or whatever,
yeah.
being the drug trafficking money arm. Um, but yeah, it doesn't seem to serve that much of a function.
Yeah, it really doesn't. I mean, it's just
Oh yeah,
they
Jason
club
brings up the Mandy bikers. Yeah, that's a good point.
the
It's just like
Mandy
in Mandy
bikers.
with the skull bikers, the skulls.
Oh yeah, yeah,
Yeah, that's a good point.
yeah. No, that is. Oh, I remember. It had something to do with the scene where when they actually go to Reggie and DeWall's place I mean that's one of the things and this may not mean anything. I thought I took something from this is when they they take the two children out of there which and that was the most. I mean, I was literally the first time I watched the season on the edge of my seat
Yeah.
because Marty opens up that door and like you don't see what he's looking at. It's like what is
Yeah.
he looking at? And then he goes out and um, you
I
know
figured. Yeah.
shoots. And I didn't know. I had no clue of
Yeah.
what it was going to be. But what's interesting is when they're carrying the dead boy and then the girl back out to the
Mhm.
road. If you notice when they're walking across the bridge, they are walking in exact lockstep. Like they're
Mm.
every step they take is right together. And
That's pretty cool. I didn't notice that bit.
yeah, I thought that was pretty neat. I was like, yeah, there's
Yeah.
definitely that's
They're locked
it's
in.
yeah, they are
Yeah.
locked in. And something that the girl later on, she's like catatonic or whatever, goes
Hmm.
into is put into the goes to the mental health facility. One of the things that she says is that the man with the scars was the worst, right? They were all
Uh
bad. He
huh.
was the worst.
Yeah.
This is interesting because later on, in episode 8, when Marty is questioning Errol's companion, um, she tells him he's going to come for you. He's worse than anybody. And so there's this sort of recognition that this guy is like he's you could say like the worst person on earth. There's nobody worse than him. And it's also interesting because, and I hadn't really noticed this until this season or to this time around, is that Errol, everybody's basically gone. Like Reggie's dead, DeWall's dead, Billy Lee died at some point. Um, And he's basically, because then he kind of goes on this killing spree post Katrina and the chaos. He's just going
Yeah.
up and down the coast, just
Hmm.
taking people out left and right. Is that he's really one of the few left, and maybe the only one. It's debatable on if what was it, Sam Tuttle, the state senator,
Hmm.
was probably involved on some level. And
Yeah.
then also you remember there's the scene where that guy, where Rust is interrogating that guy, and he said, I know about the Yellow King. And so then he gets put in, he goes back to jail, but then later, because then it's like, so somebody calls, they say it's his lawyer calls him, and then, he slashes his wrist and is dead. And so then Marty or Rust, I think, asks the people at the jail, like, well, who was on, who was guarding that night or when this happened? And they said, oh, so and so and Childress.
Yeah.
So it's clear that one of the cops, at least, like he's got to know something because it's
Yeah.
presumably Errol that called, and whatever it was, like got the guy to off himself.
Yeah. They've
But yeah,
infected every area of justice in society.
yes, exactly.
Uh,
But it's like the main. It seems like the main. A lot of the people, it's like,
yeah.
is it just him carrying on because
Yeah.
he has to? Like, I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. I don't know. I think that they have infected everything, and there's a whole other world and language happening behind the scenes from what we know. And we finally come to the conclusion at the end of it, where we meet in darkness and in Carcosa and everything's dead. That's why I think that's why all the branches are twisting around everything at the end, because all the branches of the Tuttle family tree have made their way into society,
Oh,
um, and spreading out roots. And like I said at the beginning, the entire the entire show is loomed over by the business, by the factories. And it's like you see a real juxtaposition, a real contrast between nature and industry, because there's factories rising over green fields and bayou.
yeah.
And so we see who's sort of dominating the land. I always think of William Blake's dark satanic mills looming over everything. So I think that's what it is.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. Uh, oh, something I picked up on too, and I'm just kind of looking at the episode 1. I just kind of took notes by episode. I didn't take an excessive amount, but
Hmm.
there's I can't remember. I didn't write the exact context down, but when Rust is being interviewed by the two detectives,
Yeah.
they question him and they said something about they figured Rust would be the one to know. I don't remember what they were talking about, the one to know, but then Rust tells them, he tells them to start asking the right questions. And then I
Hmm.
was like, oh, that's where they got that line that they wore out in Night Country, right? Because
Uh-huh.
Jodie Foster was like, "Oh, you got to ask. You're not asking the right
Yes.
questions."
This is a horrible trope that ruined the show.
It was so bad because, like, when
You got to
Rust is
ask the
like,
questions.
yeah, when he's
If you
like, "You
want to
got,"
solve this, you got to think of something. And let me tell you a little something. You got to ask questions.
yeah,
Okay.
you're not. You got to ask the right
Okay.
questions. When Rust, is like tapping on the folder, he's like, start asking the right effing questions.
Hmm.
I was like, okay, that works. But then, yeah,
Yeah.
when Jodie Foster, all Jodie Foster's like, "You're not asking the right questions,
You're
Doctor
not, you're not
Lecter."
asking the right you're not asking the right questions, Dr. Lecter.
It was so bad. um,
Stupid. Stupid.
an, Another thing is where we see, and not to go episode by episode here, but I'm just kind of looking at these, looking at some of the notes here, that people being creepers is, it points to it being one of the things the show does really well is subtlety, and
Hmm.
in that it hints at a lot of things, but it doesn't really bang you over the head with agendas or propaganda or anything like
You
that.
mean
And
you mean Tuttlety?
subtlety, yeah, it does subtlety really well. Because when Rust and Marty track down Dora Lang's mother, because Dora Lang is the woman who was left on display in that cane field after being killed by the cult. They ask her, they find her mother, and they ask her about Dora's father, and her mother's like, "Well, why? What have you heard?" And then Russ was like, "Well, we heard that he was dead." And then her mother kind of shoots back, "Well, why wouldn't a father bathe his own child?" Right. And so it's this sort of, clearly, whether that would, who knows what was going on, but it's like she's clearly defensive about something. And it seems that this guy was a creep, was
Yeah.
doing awful things to his own daughter, and
Mhm.
she's sort of in denial about it, and is defensive of, even though the guy's dead. And people keep, even people who don't have any kind of direct connection to the cult, kind of die in odd ways,
Yeah.
because this guy, they're like, "Oh, well, he died in his truck in Indiana or whatever," and it's like, well, maybe, but I don't know. It just seems like there's a lot of weird, random deaths and I'm not suggesting he was killed or anything. I don't know, but anyway, it's just very interesting to see that.
Yeah. Well,
Uh,
it certainly mimics the power structure and the unaliving that we see. We saw something strange that happened today or yesterday in DC. I mean, with the
what happened?
chopper going down or not in
Oh,
DC, in New York. I'm sorry, in New York.
yeah, yeah,
Um, I don't know any. There's something strange about who the people were, and I don't know. We'll have to look. We'll have to go deep diving into that one a different day. But in terms of the show, it mimics all the various all the various ways that people associated with it seem to meet an end, and it's because everything's rotten. Everything's
yeah.
rotten. That there's something rotten in the state of Fen, the fen of Fenmark. A fen is a bog,
Hmm.
right, or a bayou. So yeah, there's something rotten in the state of Fenmark, I suppose. Yeah, that fell off a yacht. Yeah, car. Well, they end up on a yacht. They go to the yacht.
Yeah,
That's one
that's
of the
true.
scenes. That's a good point, Jason. But I don't know. Is there what else? What else can we get with this one? Because I mean, I feel like this one is. It's so good. It's such a good show. It's so good, and I feel I want to do season 2 now.
Yeah, we can do seasons 2 and 3. I'm definitely down to
I
do
want to do
those.
those. I want to watch. I'm going to watch season 2 tonight. The whole
Yeah,
thing.
I'm gonna watch that. Yeah, we'll definitely do those. Yeah, I think that
Yeah.
this is, we're having fun with this one. One of the things I did want to point out, and this doesn't have anything necessarily to do with like the plot, but when Marty is talking to the two detectives, he mentions something about his dead father, and remarks to them about, oh, there was a time when
Yeah.
men didn't air their bullshit to the world. And
Hmm.
this recall to me, I recalled that famous scene when Tony Soprano is in his shrink's office, and he has that whole like famous rant about "Oh, whatever happened to Gary Cooper, the strong silent type," and it
Hmm.
was a sort of a callback. And something I noticed is this show, just the way it looks, and I don't mean like the set, I don't mean uh, the location, but I mean just the actual look of the show. It looks like The Sopranos, like the way the film, if it probably was shot
Yeah.
digitally, but and I even because I noticed that even before that line, I just when I rewatched it this time, I was like, this. The feel of the show, kind of like the visual, if people get what I mean by that,
Yeah.
I was like, I feel like I've seen this before.
Hmm.
And I was racking my brain. I was like, maybe The Sopranos. And then when Marty, had that thing about men, not airing their bullshit, and being emotional and all that. Then I went and looked up that the Tony Soprano, because I immediately thought of that. I was like, oh, it looks like The Sopranos, which I thought was a very interesting,
Huh.
probably maybe intentional, maybe it's just the way it was shot. I don't know, but
Probably because they're both run by a HBO studio.
yeah.
But yeah, I know what you mean about well, both deal with an American crime saga from sort of different, in terms of different aspects. This is a lot darker and much more occult and esoteric, but I know what you mean about the way the characters kind of achieve their three dimensionality and the way we follow these magnetic, charismatic characters through their story arc. The look of True Detective has a much more vegetative green sort of sheen to it, but it's in the same way that The Sopranos has a taupe aesthetic. It's like
Yeah.
much more 2000 or late 90s, early 2000s taupe, which is it's supposed to indicate a kind of conventionality and a mall society.
Hmm.
So all the characters have the kind of clothes they buy at the mall, and they all and everything. It's about Tony's family and the way that the children do things, and they have a school, and there's an underbelly to it. And this is kind of the same, but mixed in with a heavily esoteric element, and in the Deep South, even beyond Deep South. This is Louisiana, and where this is set is like beyond Southern.
Yeah.
It's like it's kind of a Southern Gothic in extremis. It's like right at the point of death with this show, I think.
Now, I've never been to Louisiana, but having been to
Mm.
Louisiana, do you think that this show accurately portrays Louisiana in the sense of kind of the culture? And I mean, not saying that people in
Mm.
Louisiana are evil on this level, but I just mean in sort of the day to day.
No,
You don't think it's
no,
accurate?
no, and it's not factual, but it's truthful.
Okay.
So it's in the same way that Yellowstone portrays life in Montana for really wealthy people. It's nothing like
Mhm.
that. It's much more mundane, and there's life, and it's probably actually much more complex in life with machinations that may be similar, but it's not like big grand landscapes and people always fighting for territory and the barons and the cattle. It's not like that. And same with this. It's you can see why they did that. Um, and there's a time and a place, but I think it's much more indicative of a time and a place that's for all these things that are like that.
Hmm.
Louisiana just happens to be the kind of prism through which we see it. But no, people aren't like that. Like with the whole bunny ranch and all that shit. I mean, that's I'm sure that exists or whatever, but yeah, you never see that. I don't know about any of that.
Yeah, I mean that I didn't that seemed kind of yeah, I mean that seems kind of outrageous.
Yeah.
It didn't seem. It's also funny because I tried watching Yellowstone, I just couldn't get into it. But it's
Hmm.
funny because there are these like multi-millionaire, like huge old money family, and I
Yeah.
heard a guy who actually owns and runs a ranch say one time that he was like, the best way to become a millionaire as a rancher is to start as a billionaire.
Hmm.
Right. It's like nobody's has like private helicopters they're flying
Yeah.
around in, and yeah,
Right.
whatever, getting in like politics. I mean, that's
Yeah.
just an aside. But
Well, I
speaking
know
of the, oh,
I,
go
I
ahead.
have I have a friend who and his family would be as close to that as you could possibly get. Probably even more so than the movie. I mean, they would be way wealthier than the movie, and
Hmm.
they don't are nothing like that.
Yeah.
They don't have helicopters and they don't have any of that shit. They're not like fighting and we got to get the boys and all that stuff. This is it's bullshit.
Yeah, it's. I mean, it's kind of like a soap opera,
Yeah.
is what I took from it. But speaking of the Bunny Ranch, this was, and this just shows how, I don't know if I'd say Rust is clairvoyant, but at least perceptive, is because when they're leaving, and Marty gives the underage girl that's working there who knew Dora, he gives her $20 and they're walking away, and Russ is like, "Oh, what are you putting down, a down payment?"
Mm,
And
that was
then,
big.
what we see later, he goes to the cell phone store, and then goes, Marty years later, then goes to the bar, and oh,
Yeah.
it's that girl that he,
Hmm.
who's at the Bunny Ranch, that he ends up having an affair with, who is obviously damaged, and
Hmm.
has serious issues as a result of years of working as an underage prostitute. Yes, indeed. What's up, Block Party? Like the
Yeah.
stream.
What's
Are
up,
we
Block Party?
fighting? And you will
What's up, Block
lose.
Party?
You can fight Block Party and you will lose. So make sure to like the stream. Also, I forgot to mention this real quick. Want to give a big shout out and a thank you to the real John Connor. He sent a donation, of which I will send um, half of to BLA, and he said
Oh,
time
nice.
is a flat circle.
Hmm.
So I will be passing half of that along to BLA. So thank you to real John Connor.
Nice.
Appreciate the support. And oh, actually, I remember one of the things I was going to say is, with the time is a flat circle. Rust says that when he's talking, is when he's talking to the detectives. I think it's when he's talking to them, and he's quoting. He doesn't say where he got the time as a flat circle from, but he's talking about that. And he said those children that are in that container at Reggie and DeWall's place at their meth lab. He's like, they're going to be there again and again and again and again. And he doesn't mean it in this sense. He
Yeah.
means it in like a cosmic, like, oh,
Yeah.
this the same thing's happening. But it sort of speaks to, he's actually onto something, because it speaks to that the and we see this with the girl when Rust goes and visits her at the mental health facility, is that um, in sort of being, even though the boy was dead, but the girl, it's like
Mhm.
she's still, in a sense, is
Yeah.
still in that shipping container, and in that she's sort of, that this sort of cyclical, maybe that cyclical is not the exact right word, but that kind of endless, going through severely traumatic things, as particularly at a young age, you can kind of, I don't want to say get stuck there, but it's something that it sort of interrupts the normal path of life. And we can kind of see that, like, mentally, people, not through their own choices, it's kind of a trauma response, kind of go back there over and over and over. So even though
Yeah.
he means it in a different sense, he's actually correct in the sense of what that means for survivors of that kind of thing, and their mental state going forward.
Yeah. She's locked in Carcosa. She's
Yeah,
spiritually possessed
yeah.
by this demonic, demon lord. And hopefully she'll escape from it. But like you said, catatonic and in this place, I mean, she's locked inside, like you said, as a trauma response. And it doesn't seem like she's going to get out of it. But hopefully, but also, the characters are locked inside. I mean, Rust is locked in with this thing. He's in the shipping
Mhm.
container there also. Marty is there too. And hopefully the reckoning at the end will allow them to break open the doors and escape from it. And I think that's why at the end, in the last scene, he sees the vortex in the sky, and he sees how he has some sort of, as he says in Tombstone, it's not revenge he's after, it's the reckoning. There was a
Yes.
reckoning, and they did it, and they win. Of course, they don't win the whole thing. That's why we have a season 2 and 3. But he definitely won in terms of getting rid of this fucking guy.
Yeah, and that and you sort of see a change in Rust in that
Yeah, you do.
he sort of appears to be this static character throughout the series, but it's not until the very end of the series we realize he's actually a dynamic character
Hmm.
because he talks about his daughter in a way that's not this kind of cold, detached type of way. It's like you can sense the love there, and
Hmm.
it's almost like he's sort of like this. It sort of seems like emotions he's never felt before, and you can kind of see him trying to process them.
Yeah,
And he's talking about going to this place, and like his daughter was there, and then you see like he's changed by this, and that even though he acknowledges we didn't get them all and we never will, still we did something good, and he's kind of broken out of that mental
yeah,
prison that he's been in. And I think that that can kind of give hope, like for the girl we were just talking about as well, because you can see like even when he just mentions the guy with the scars on his face, you can all and again she was another phenomenal performance in this. You can almost see in her face it's like you can almost see her going
yeah,
back to that shipping container or Carcosa or wherever she um, had
yeah,
been. And so yeah, that's something that I anyway that's just something I thought was really
yeah,
interesting about Rust, and how we see that yeah he's not the same person. Even though it
yeah,
happens late in the season, he's been changed by this, I think, in a positive way.
yeah, yeah. He used his the loss of his daughter. He made he made the case a conduit for all of his energy and all of his any feelings that he had. He put them into the case. Now he can be free of that, and he talks about a warm place where he didn't want to let go, and he was going to see her again. And
That's
this
right.
gives him a redemption arc. Like you said, he's a dynamic character, and also allows Marty some sort of closure too, because when he first invites him over to the house and Russ shows up and he just looks like a total mess and he's got the flowers face down. We know why, or at least we figure out why, and it's because he can't be in a conventional family setting because of his daughter. But Marty hadn't earned that yet to know what that is. That's all been focused into the case, and now there's a redemption at the end.
Yeah, and we see it's interesting you mention that because we see the same thing. It's like Marty can't really be in a typical family setting, right? It's like he has no idea
Yeah,
how to interact with his daughters, and then
right.
he rationalizes his alcoholism and affairs and all of this is, oh well, it's because I have to decompress and I don't want to bring this
Yeah,
around the kids. So he's going around running around with whoever, and getting drunk all the time, and so he's
the man's
it's
got
kind
the
of like
morals of an alley cat.
uh, and one of the things I wrote this down because I thought this was a good line is when Rust and one of the things that we actually see with Rust is that he goes out and actually does the legwork, while Marty's sitting around, telling obscene stories to his friends at, cop bars.
Yeah,
Uh, Rust is out there pounding the pavement, so to speak, talking to hookers and excuse me, and drug dealers.
yeah,
And um, one of the things is just as a side note, I think the most unrealistic thing about this show, about this series, is that Rust would have never gotten a job as a cop because he was way too smart.
yeah,
Like this guy is much too smart and is much too like that's a real thing. I've talked about this on,
yeah.
on streams before. Is that they actually discriminate against people who are too intelligent. They don't want them to be cops. But one of the things that is really revelatory that there's two lines I think that you could say sum up that are sort of interesting observations on cops. Is one is in The Departed, where Leonardo DiCaprio's character goes to see his shrink. He's like, "Oh yeah, there was a cop leaving when I came in," and the shrink's like, "Well, how'd you know he was a cop?" And he's like, "Bad haircut, no dress sense, and an air of scumbag entitlement." And then we have where Rust, because he's sort of, you can see how he kind of makes people uneasy a little bit
Hmm.
in some
Yes.
cases. And this hooker that he was buying Quaaludes from, she tells me, she's like, you seem kind of strange, like you might be dangerous. And he said, well, what did he say? I wrote the core. I said, of course I'm dangerous. I'm police. I can do terrible things to people with impunity.
Yeah.
And so
Hmm.
there's this recognition that he can. But the interesting thing though is, again, to go back to his use of violence, is he doesn't. That's the only, maybe the only case of where, with those two guys where they're trying to find the Hooker Ranch, is with those two guys, is whereas Marty is actually the one who takes advantage and uses the fact that he's a cop, like those two guys that his teenage daughter gets caught with later on.
Yeah.
His buddies at the jail are like, oh yeah, we're gonna go take a walk. Oh no, the cell's open, and then he gives him a beating, and where he takes full advantage of that and uses it for his own personal revenge, whereas Rust is aware of that. Like, yes, I
Yeah.
can basically do whatever I want. Get same thing like with when Marty goes and kicks the door in of Alexander Daddario's apartment, where she's with that guy, and
Yeah.
it's just like
Or
a
like the
total.
evidence locker. They should
Oh,
have better
that too. Yeah,
security here.
yeah. Right. Yeah. Just walks out with
Yeah,
a
with a
brick
key.
of blow and is like,
Yeah.
ah, yeah. So anyway, I thought that was kind of an interesting, and it's not to
Mhm.
say that you know, uh, Rust is all good and Marty is all bad. I mean, it's
Yeah.
easy to be kind of hard on Marty, but
Yeah.
these are complicated, like damaged type of people, and we see that carry on with. I think done really well in season 2 with the Rachel
Yeah.
McAdams and Colin Farrell characters.
Mhm.
Is so anyway, that was just a kind of a side note about it. I think it makes it more realistic.
Yeah, that's about all I got, Maddie. I don't know what else to say about this one. I mean, there's so much in it, and I think that um I like the brevity of the series, of the
Yeah.
season. I think that it is so tight and it's so well done, and it is pretty concise, and it's worth a rewatch. Anybody should go back and rewatch this one. And we're gonna watch season 2 and 3 for you guys, and we'll do those because season 2 also has a lot of good stuff in it, and some really disturbing scenes. But I think that
Yes.
this really kickstarted this sort of television reconnaissance in a way that's they took advantage of and now has totally fallen off. Um, hopefully they'll, if they do another
Yeah.
season with this, hopefully they do something and they go back to the beginning, or I don't know what they can do with it. Come up with something new.
Yeah. I think that, yeah, because they lean too heavily on season
Yeah,
season 4.
yeah,
Season 4 leaned too heavily on season 1, and then
yeah,
kind of went um, sideways. And yeah, I was looking at some of the. I mean, there's a couple other things. Some of the interesting things, like with Reggie, we see with his tattoos, he has this kind of combination. He has that brand, as Charlie mentions, he has that brand, the spiral things branded on his
yeah,
back, which we see that he has the big, Baphomet goat head pentagram
yeah,
tattooed on his back. And then he's some of the other tattoos was like, I don't, he has the SWP, which is that one I didn't know. I had to look it up. It was like Supreme, was it White Pride or White Power, I think. And then he had like the, swastika tattoo, and he had
uh,
the AB tattoo, and then the 666 that was kind of in
mhm,
a
yeah,
circle kind of shape. And those are like Aryan Brotherhood tattoos, and that was the thing.
yeah,
It seemed like he did time, but it's like I don't think that. I was like that seems like a stretch that he would have been, because Aryan Brotherhood, that seems like from anything I've seen and heard and read, that's like people doing life sentences in
mhm,
hardcore like
yeah,
federal prisons, California, and that kind of thing. But one thing I did notice he had a black handprint tattooed on one of his
mm,
his arms, and that is I ordered a book the other day, just synchronicity. It was called The Black Hand of Death, and it's about a
Henry Lee
guy.
Lucas.
Well, this was about a guy who was in the Mexican mafia,
Uh-huh.
and so I was like, well, that's interesting. But then because I was like, oh, I just ordered that book, but then I was like, but he's not Mexican. So, but then I thought that's exactly where I went. Is like maybe it's a Black Hand of Death
Yeah.
kind of reference.
The Black Hand is also the secret society that Gavrilo Princip was part of, the guy that assassinated the Archduke.
Oh
Archduke
shoot, I didn't even think about
Franz
it. That's a good
Ferdinand.
point.
Yeah, it's called the Black Hand.
Yes, very interesting. And then let me see if there was anything else. I think. Oh, there was just an interesting thing about like Jimmy Ledoux, the guy who was related to Reggie
Mm-hmm.
and DeWall, who they find at the car shop, who had done well, and he mentioned how they had gone on a hunting trip, and his dad. His dad said that DeWall and Reggie, he said they were not white enough to be white trash.
Uh-huh.
And he mentioned how Errol, who he still didn't know who he was kind of like staring at him and
Yeah.
super creepy. And he was like, yeah, they got drunk and were too hungover. So my dad and I left. And so it's like his dad seemed to pretty clear if he didn't know exactly what these guys were up to. Like there's some, excuse me, recognition of that, of, what of these guys were up to no good, and so it's like
Yeah.
he was not going to let his son go off into out into the woods with these guys. And last thing, just one last note on this is at the end of season 7 is when they go visit Dolores, the woman who had worked for the Tuttles, and she starts talking about Carcosa, and
Yeah.
she says that, and then her niece is like, "Oh yeah, I heard about the Tuttles." Like, no, thank you. But then Dolores, when Rust asks her if he knows what Carcosa is, and she says it's the wind of invisible voices, which we see
Ugh.
as when Rust enters Carcosa, and
You in Carcosa now.
yeah, it's like you can't see it, but you can hear it through all, kind of going throughout this whole temple. And then this was another quote I was looking for with the thing with them trying to break outside of time, is she says, "Him who eats time."
Ugh.
And like that's actually, now to think about it, that scene with Dolores, that is probably the creepiest scene
Mm.
in the entire
Yeah.
season, is because it's like she just totally changes, and it's like,
Yeah.
again, it's like this demon thing kind of taking over, where she's like, I think she says over and over, like, death is not the end, rejoice, and like him who eats time, and so, and it makes, I don't know, that was
That's
just
Kronos. That's
super.
the Goya painting, Kronos eating his
Yes,
children. Yeah.
exactly. Yes, very very good point.
Uh-huh.
And then one last thing, I know I said the last thing, one last thing that I didn't catch until this time around is when Errol, like I mentioned, he refers to Reggie and DeWall as acolytes, and says that Russ blessed them, presumably by killing them.
Mm-hmm.
And Errol says that DeWall and Reggie were witnesses to my journey.
Mm-hmm.
And then he says, "Lovers, I am not ashamed." And it's like,
Mm.
oh, okay, I didn't pick
Ugh.
up on that. So there's a whole nother level
Ugh.
to this you know, relationship, if you will.
Yeah.
Like there's, it's kind of like that they've. I think again, I think their ultimate goal is just last thing on the cult. Their ultimate goal, I think, is again to kind of like break outside
Mm-hmm.
of time and
Yeah.
transcend the this plane and reach the infernal plane. But
Mm-hmm.
in the process, it's all about transgression, and
Mm-hmm.
whatever that means of doing anything that's sort of like outside of like
Yeah.
normal kind of behavior. But
Yeah.
again, it's like at the end where Russ tells Marty when they're outside of the hospital, he said there's only one story, light versus dark. And
Mm.
I think that kind of sums it up pretty well.
That sums it up. Yeah. I agree. The Miltonian purposeful degradation and power, and ends up with a sort of a Gnostic viewpoint at the end. But it certainly, there's a redemption arc for Rust, and I think it's a great show. It's really great.
Yeah, and I think there's a redemption for
Yeah.
Marty as well, because we see, even though
Yes.
his family was kind of split up and he didn't even really know what was going on, but there's sort of this. It took this horrible event for them to kind of, come back together, and him to
Yeah.
reconnect with his daughters, who he obviously had a
Yeah.
fractured relationship with.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I think it wrapped it up well, but not in like a corny kind of
Yeah.
way.
It was good. It was a very good ending.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So.
So we gonna do
Um,
season two? Yeah,
Yes,
season two.
yes,
Let's do
folks, stay
season two.
tuned. We're gonna do season 2. We're gonna do season 3,
We're gonna
and
do season two. Yeah.
yeah. So we'll do at least do season 2. Season 3, I don't
Yeah.
know that.
We'll see.
We'll see. That one, I liked it, but I don't know how much if we could really do a full thing on that. But anyway, everybody, thank you so much for tuning in. Thanks again to Real
Thanks,
John
y'all.
Connor. Appreciate
Thank you,
y'all.
John
This
Connor.
was a lot of fun. Always good to dive into these things, even if it's darker. We try to bring some
That's
levity
right.
to it. So, all right, everybody, have a great night, and we
Peace.
will catch y'all again soon.
Peace.